Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Beau Taillefer and Eric Rasmussen. Season 2, Episode 28, Whole-part-whole and chunking.
Anyways, today we're going to talk about two concepts they're kind of related, but they are different. Whole-part-whole and chaining. So, Eric, maybe you can help me out. I forget who contributed the idea of whole-part-whole to music learning theory, because I don't believe it was Gordon himself.
I'm not 100% sure. When I first learned of it, it was Gordon. It wasn't Vygotsky, was it?
Well, whole-part-whole exists, in wider education. It exists in sports research too. And one of the things that comes up is there are some skills that you can't practice the parts of. For example, if you're learning to do a somersault, it's very difficult to, you can practice the initial jump, but kind of once you commit to the jump, it's very hard to break it down into sequential steps. So you kind of just have to commit to the flip itself. But some skills can actually be practiced sequentially and broken down into their parts, like playing a song, for example. So why don't you help us understand, how do we use whole-part-whole when we're teaching?
Well, in the way I learned it initially, music learning theory. So you learn repertoire, right? You're practicing, your tonalities and meters that give meaning to what it is that you're performing. So if you're not able to give meaning to that which you are performing, you don't have an understanding of the context. If you have an understanding of the context, then you're able to give meaning. And then there's two contexts, and I've got, did I say, I got a little echo. Anyway, you've got to work on tonal patterns that help you to audiate tonality, and you've got to do rhythm patterns to help you learn to audiate meter. And meter and tonality were originally the two contexts that music learning theory provided for our understanding of music when I was studying with Gordon. So, and then since then I've added the harmonic context in a different way, but without understanding harmonic context, you might not know what so me, if you're in major, what does so me mean? And we've covered this a couple times, where that so me could be part of a median chord, it could be part of a tonic chord, it could be part of a sixth.
Can I demonstrate that just so
chord.
People can hear
you've
that?
got a guitar. Go ahead. Yeah, please.
So Eric's talking about. I'm just gonna. So if this is so me, it could be part of a major of a one chord. Could also be part of the 5 of 6. It's a little spicy voicing. Could be part of the 6 chord. Could be part of the 4 chord. Could be part of the 2 chord. Could be part of the 5 chord. Why not, right?
Yeah, sure.
That's a really, I think that's a really important insight for people to have around patterns, tonal patterns, because we often assume that a tonal pattern stands for a certain function. It's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, basically you understand more of the whole by working on the parts. And when you when you go back to working on the whole, you have a better understanding because you've worked on the parts.
Yep.
So whole, experience the whole, work on the parts, the tonality and meter of that helps you bring understanding, and you could add other parts to it, expression and timbre and style and whatnot. And then go back to the whole. And because you've worked on the parts, the whole makes more sense. And that's, Vygotsky's in there somewhere.
Yep.
The whole language reading was kind of, you could take a Vygotskyan perspective. Is that the word, Vygotskyan? Take a perspective on how he looked at how learning was happening with reading. And Gordon was heavily influenced by Vygotsky's
a lot of people
his
in
philosophy.
Education are still very...
Some of these things are just truths no matter who look at them. I'm sure it existed before him and he took it from somebody else.
Yeah, for sure. So we have this whole part whole in terms of understanding context. I mean, there's also another part of what you were saying I think is important to highlight, and we covered this in the episode on ear training that's either going to come out right after this or around this. The idea of learning things in the context of a song, I'm a very big fan of. So, like for example, when Eric and I were talking about teaching how to hear 2-5-1s, you don't just hit people with just random that are outside of the context of a song. We try to embed that in like London Bridge or Mary Had a Little Lamb so people can hear it in its authentic musical context. And then, you take it apart and you sing the bass lines and you sing the tonal patterns and you hear the functions. And so there's that kind of whole part whole where we're just learning content, but it's nestled underneath or within a song. And I think that's wildly unpopular in a lot of music teaching. A lot of people learn even scales, for example. I'm not opposed to learning scales, but man, if you learn a scale in the context of a song, it sure makes a lot more sense. But any of this content, rhythm patterns, tonal patterns.
Yeah, it's just a basic understanding of how to best help children or students understand is to break things down and then to go back after you've broken those parts down, that then you have a better understanding of the whole. And you can always go deeper with the whole by understanding more of the parts or getting a deeper understanding of the parts. By doing that, you're obviously going to get a deeper understanding of the whole that those parts are made out of.
Another way you can look at the whole part learning, especially in terms of instrumental practicing pieces that are technically challenging and all this. Like say you're learning a Bach tune that's like 64 bars long. One thing I've mentioned a lot on the podcast, and we talked about this with Molly Gebrian and other people, it is almost always a profound waste of time at a certain level to just keep playing songs over and over again. If you're struggling with a technical challenge, it just doesn't make sense because it's too much. Like for me to play a 32 or 64 bar section, or even if that's a whole piece, I really can't work on the stuff that's challenging me by just playing that over and over again for an hour. I need to break things down into smaller units. And this is another way that I think of whole part whole. And people within the precision teaching arena talk about this too. But one thing that I'll often do when I'm working on a piece like this, I'll take 16 bars or 32 bars. I'll play the whole thing once or twice. There's nothing wrong with that. That's great. You need to understand the whole, or listen to it once or twice. And then I'll go through the whole piece. I'll play every 2 bars like 3 times in a row. And I'll just I'll go through the whole piece twice like that. And then I'll play the whole piece again from the beginning. And that sounds like a stupendously simple way to structure your practice, but it's profoundly effective. And I'll do less repetitions on the parts that I can already play. If I can already audiate them or I have no technical difficulties with them, I'm not going to just play them like 5 times in a row, but I'll go through the piece like that. And that's a way you can do whole part whole learning to address both technical challenges on your instrument, but also, I mean, if I'm learning classical guitar pieces, I'll go through the whole piece like that in 2 or 4 bar increments and make sure I can sing all the bass lines. Because I find so many piano players and guitar players specifically, because you're playing an instrument with multiple voices, people are not able to sing the bass lines that they play. It's like, well, how are you going to phrase this thing if you can't even audiate the bass line? It's just, the bass line is just thought of as like, oh, I got to like play this along with the melody. It's not something that you actually learn to audiate. And That's another thing you can do with this whole part whole learning, because it's very difficult to just learn how to sing 64 bars of a bass line by memory, by recall out of nowhere.
Yeah.
You have to break things down into smaller units.
Yeah. And Gordon would say, in terms of technical expertise, you can learn by breaking things down, like a difficult passage or a difficult pattern that's within the piece itself. But he would say that to gain tonal understanding, work on the tonal patterns that are not necessarily the ones that are like verbatim taken from the piece, but give you an understanding of the tonality and the functions. And same way with the rhythm, that you come away with a better understanding of the style and the rhythm, and of course the meter is what we're after. But gaining any of that stuff first before applying it to the whole, like you don't know what the piece is, but we're going to work on this first, doesn't give you the same power as being exposed to, hey, this is where we're headed. We're headed to this. This is the big, this is the movement, or the, you said the 64 bar piece or whatever. You can, whatever it is, you want to listen to it and gain the experience of the whole before you start breaking it down. Now, at some point, if you're studying the ring cycle, you're going to want to, maybe not listen to the whole opera, all 5 operas.
Yeah, the whole might be a section, like a 16 bar section. That might be the whole.
Yeah.
You said something really important I want to make sure we emphasize here. When you're working on a piece instrumentally yourself or like with a student, the way that you're using whole part whole changes depending on what your objective is. If it's a technical difficulty, I might take one single like technical thing on the guitar that's giving me problems and make a whole bunch of little improv exercises that have me address that. But if it's a tonal issue, I might start singing, like if I can't hear this like 6 chord, going to this 2 chord or whatever, I might start singing a bunch of different tonal patterns that are not verbatim in the piece. So the parts that I work on is not necessarily just playing the piece in 2 bar increments repetitively, right? I might want to work on the rhythm and I might, switch what I'm doing. And I find that that's not often done with people. People are often they're trying to get repetitions in instead of thinking like, what's the problem I'm having? Is it a technical problem or is it an audiation problem?
Yeah, and I find that kids, when they get something wrong, they immediately want to start over, like, and then get through that part, right? It's like I can't get through that part. So, but audiationally, they can't start in the middle. It's like it's just because they sing that first part in your head really quickly and then start where you are. And you can avoid that.
So right.
But it's like I can't start on that because that's not where my mind starts. My mind starts at the beginning of the piece, and so you've got to be able to break kids of that habit, but also understand that what's giving rise to them having that habit is the fact that, hey, when I play this piece, it has to start at the beginning, and so when you go to work on it, the kid automatically starts over.
I highly suggest you start doing that as soon as possible with students, because it's just a waste of time. Like, there's nothing wrong with playing a melody from the beginning, but if you're working on bars 7 and 8 of a melody, you're going to spend so much of your practice time playing the first 6 bars. And something you can do as a teacher to start weaning students off of this starting at bar 1 syndrome, you can play, like I could play the first. And I'll have them play the end of that. And, because really we're actually talking about like a luxury problem here. The student's audiating the melody. That's why they want to start at the beginning. So that's really not, in the grand scheme of things, I mean, that's a good sign that they want to hear it like that. But in terms of the practical side of just learning stuff, it can be a lot. And I always use the example, like, what if the piece is 16 pages long? You're going to start at bar 1 every time, and they start laughing at me. But it's there's something in there.
Yeah, it's what's easy for their audiation to do, and it's sometimes we can jump ahead in our brain and hear audiate the piece in a half a second up to the point where I'm having trouble. Sometimes I pick up a CD, look at it, and I go, oh, I haven't heard this forever, but I look at it and it kind of jumps through my audiation really quickly. It's like I can, you're audiating a lot of time in a short span. Say even a second or a millisecond. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, I've audiated that now. Do I want to listen to that CD now?
That's a fascinating point because, I'm sitting here and thinking, if I wanted to, I can just audiate the last 4 bars of a blues, and I can feel the form as if it's the last 4 bars without having gone through the first 8 bars in my head.
But I say you already did.
I don't know.
To do that, there already has to be there. Or does it?
Maybe that's another. I don't know. It didn't seem like it was physically possible for me to go through that in that much time. Maybe.
Yeah. All right, let's not derail too far, but it is interesting. Like, what psychologically is it unbeknownst to us that we're doing that before we do, audiate, say the last 4 bars, like you said.
So this idea of chaining now. So chaining is a very extreme way of working on the parts. And I got this idea from multiple people, from Jason Solomon, who's a trombonist. I forget what university. I apologize, Jason. He's a professor. And Molly Gebrian talks about this, chaining. But basically, chaining is this idea of, let's say you have this works so well instrumentally, by the way, to solve technical issues. But say you have a phrase that's like 4 beats of 16th notes, or subdivisions, and you can't play the whole thing. What you would do is you start with maybe just the first note. Play that a couple times. Add the next note. Add the next note. Every time you add a note, you play it a couple times. But anyways, you just keep sneaking a note in, and the whole point of chaining, sorry for the use of the word whole there, the point of the chaining is that you play at tempo. So there's a few reasons I really like this. One, if you try to start everything at a slow tempo and scale the tempo up, a lot of people run into this problem where the piece needs to be at 120 beats a minute, and they start at 60, and they can play it. Then they ratchet it up over the course of weeks, 70, 80, 90. And then for the love of God, they can't get past 100. It's just no matter what they do. And so what chaining does is it reverses this process. You start at 120, or you start at the goal tempo, but you play in very tiny sections, 2 notes, 3 notes, and you keep adding it. And a lot of people have found, this guy Jason Solomon is a big fan of this, that the technical issues seem to get addressed better than starting at a ridiculously slow tempo. So there's all that. There's the technical side of it, and it's a great technique. I recommend it. The reason I like it, though, from an audiation perspective, is that when you're teaching beginners, they often struggle to retain audiation of something when it's slowed down to a super big degree, because that's a hard skill to do. If you can audiate this, a lot of people can't audiate this. There's something about a tempo threshold where once it gets too slow, people lose the sense of meter specifically. And so the reason I like at tempo chaining is it helps the student retain proper audiation of the thing they're working on. And that makes a world of a difference for beginners.
Yeah, a function of working memory at some level, because if you're retaining things, how fast is that cycle going in terms of the stages of audiation, going from just retaining momentarily all the way to predicting. And here we're not predicting so much because you already know what's coming when you do it this way. Can you tell me how this chaining relates to chunking?
Yeah. So basically what I would do, for example, if I had a piece let's use Bach for an example because there's so many great examples of his music. Is the whole thing is just 16th notes or subdivisions in duple or triple. Like it's just 64 bars of just nonstop machine gun of subdivisions. And a way that you can go about playing this is to chain every 2 macro beats. So what I mean by this is, say you're in triple and you have 32 bars of subdivisions. I have a piece that I'm sorry. It's still a bit rough. I'm working on this, right? So I would start like this. Do a few repetitions of that. And I keep going until I have added 2 macro beats worth of stuff. Now, I'm not going to keep adding more until I'm at the end of 32 bars. This is just going to take forever. So what I do is I now move forward to the 3rd and 4th macro beat of the piece, and I repeat the whole process. And then eventually, once that's down, I do it in 4 macro beat chunks. So now I chunk the little section.
Yeah, you don't chain large, massive structures together that way. You
Here's some test audio.
Chain bits.
Okay.
And then
so at first chained, the chaining is done
another chunk
by just taking a very small section. I like working in macro beats, 2 macro beats, especially if you're talking about subdivisions. And you chain individual notes like that. And then this idea of chunking is you take these separate little chunks of macro beats that you've worked on, and after you spend a certain amount of practice sessions on 2 macro beat chunks, you try to fuse them into 4 macro beat chunks. And I find once you get to like 4 or 8 macro beats, you can just all of a sudden play the whole piece. You don't have to keep scaling this up infinitely.
Right. You're not chaining measures 1 through 4 and then add 5 and then add 6 and then add 7. You could chain 1 through 4 and then chain 5 through 8, and then now you've got a chunk that you can put together, right?
And some people might need to do more detailed chaining. I mean, if you listen to Molly Gebrian talk about that, she goes in a very systematic way, from like macro beats up to like bars to phrases. I personally find on the guitar, and it might be just a difference with the technical complexity of the guitar versus the violin or the viola. Sorry, Molly. I just find once I can get to like 4 bars of something, I can just play the whole phrase. There's not a need to go from 4 bars to 8 bars to 16. Just once I hit kind of 4 bars of something with subdivisions, it's just the whole piece is online in my brain. Because I've worked on the parts enough that the whole comes through. But maybe, who knows? I mean, maybe if I was working on a piece that was so technically challenging for me, which I don't even know if that'd be a good plan, in terms of difficulty level, I think it's better to slowly scale it up. But yeah, chaining and chunking are great techniques to add to problem solving, especially in the technical avenue on your instrument.
Yeah, it's not necessarily audiational, although it could be, right? Like, what do you need to be able to do to fix it? But it applies just as well to audiational value as it does to technical.
I mean, I personally find that if you're already going to be chaining macro beats, you might as well just do every other repetition sung, right? Mm-hmm. So you might as well play one on your instrument, sing one, play one, sing one, because you're just going to learn how to sing the piece while you do this, and rather than having to spend a whole other session to do that. Yeah,
and if you're having trouble, then break it down into what we talked about in the last episode, was whole-part-whole. So work on the tonal pattern and the rhythm patterns that support where you're having audiational difficulty. Uh-huh. So one thing I discovered in high school, and when we were told, here's your 6 pieces you have to memorize for marching band, that what I did that was most successful was, once I heard the whole a couple times or played through, that in order to memorize stuff, I would start at the end and add the measure before it, and then end the measure before that, and then find similar spots in the music where you kind of had the same rhythm or the same, something was same about it. He was like, oh, this is a repetition of the theme somewhere, and you go find that. Or it was on its own, which is fine too, but that eventually you learn, as you go through the piece forwards, it's like, oh, I already know what's coming next because you've already chunked backwards.
I think that's such a great idea, especially if hopefully when you get into that, you've already have some sense of what the whole piece sounds like. I don't think that's a good idea if you don't have a sense, but a lot of famous musicians do that. David Russell, like one of the best classical guitarists in the world, he learns pieces like that.
Because if you start the beginning that way, you don't know what the next 4 bars is going to be or the next bit. But if you go backwards, it's like you always can get to the end. Go back, do the last 20 measures, you can get to the end. And it's kind of like you feel like you've ended.
Well, and you're always playing towards what you can audiate.
Yes.
So you're already predicting what you're getting towards, and that's one of the reasons I like it. So yeah, you could go through the whole piece in the reverse order, starting at the last 2 macro beats or whatever, and those are great ideas too.
Yeah. So
I like that.
Is there anything else? I mean, it's a pretty basic concept, but it's not used well or enough.
Yeah. I would say like pretty much all my students naturally do it now, just from me doing it with them so much. It's absurd how powerful it is. Chaining is so powerful.
Then you're modeling the behavior for them and showing them exactly what to do.
We take turns when I do it in lessons.
Great.
So I do it once, but up. They do it once, but up. I do it, and I don't have them move on until I feel like they've done 2 or 3, solid repetitions. But you wouldn't believe, you wouldn't believe how much the accuracy rate goes up. Like if you're trying to get, 70-80% on first exposure, chaining is ruthlessly effective for this because you just don't add more unless you get the percent right.
Yep. And the experience of learning it that way versus being told, do it this way. When you're demonstrating and you're gaining from the person who's teaching, and you're also gaining from the students' feedback while they're playing exactly what to do, because it's not just like, okay, because theoretically it's a really simple concept, but the application of it seems to be the thing that holds it up from being effective.
Well, and they start developing a sense of like, okay, this is what it feels to practice when like Beau's practicing with me, and I know like what it feels like when I'm getting a lot right, and he would add more now. And then I've seen a lot of my students when they start chaining on their own, they can tell like, oh, I shouldn't add more yet. Like it's not secure enough to add more. And the other reason I like chaining, other than just like the technical benefits and even the audiation benefits with the at tempo, is that kids like playing fast. They like playing fast. They think it's hilarious. It's a little bit, I don't know what you want to call it. It's a little bit controversial to have this idea like you gotta start small and slowly ratchet that metronome up, and it
doesn't work that way.
No, it's often baloney. Usually if they're not ready to chain a piece, I just won't teach it. Because it's going to be too much of a technical challenge for them to overcome. If they can't overcome it 1 note at a time, how the hell are they going to overcome it? So
yeah, but it's pretty extreme. I like better like a musical idea tagged to a next musical idea, which could be 2 micro beats, it could be 2 macro beats, it could be that there's an actual piece of a phrase that makes sense. But this is boiling it down to even more minutia than that, if you want to.
When I was in grade 9, I taught myself how to play Chopin's Minute Waltz out of sheer stubbornness. I was like, I'm not even a piano player. I can learn this 1 damn note at a time. Little did I know that 20 years later, I would have been reading tons of research articles on, chaining, and that was actually like a really good technique. Because I was like, I'll just take it 1 note at a time. There's only 1 note I need to add. It took me a couple months to learn how to play it, but pretty good.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Well, we'll stop there. I really think it's a useful technique to explore in your own practice and in the studio. So
awesome.
Cool.